The snow was falling heavily that December evening, the kind of snow that transforms a city into something quieter, softer, almost reverent. The streetlights cast a warm glow through the swirling flakes, and the buildings along Madison Avenue looked like something from an old Christmas card, their windows golden with light against the deepening twilight. James Crawford stood outside his office building, a tall structure of glass and steel, where he'd spent the last 12 hours in back-to-back meetings. He was 42 years old, with dark brown hair styled neatly back, and he wore an expensive black overcoat over his suit. A silver watch caught the light on his wrist as he checked the time. Nearly 7 o'clock. Another long day and a long string of them. He was the CEO of Crawford Industries, a commercial development firm his father had founded 30 years ago. James had taken over 5 years earlier, and he'd grown the company substantially. Success, they called it. Though lately, standing alone on winter evenings like this, James wasn't entirely sure what success meant anymore. His driver was running late, caught in traffic somewhere across town. James stood near the building's entrance, snow collecting on his shoulders, watching the city move around him. People hurried past with their heads down, rushing to get home, to get warm, to get to wherever they needed to be. That's when he noticed her, a little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, standing near the iron railing that bordered the building. She had light blonde hair pulled back in a small ponytail, and she wore a tan winter coat that looked slightly too thin for this weather. A red dress or sweater showed underneath, and her small backpack sat at her feet. Her boots were worn but practical, the kind a mother buys hoping they'll last through the winter. But it was her face that caught James's attention. She looked lost, worried. Her eyes were scanning the sidewalk, watching each person who passed as if searching for someone specific. James felt a familiar tug of concern, the same instinct that had made him stop countless times before, when he saw someone who needed help. Most people probably walked right past her, too absorbed in their own lives to notice a small child standing alone in the snow. He approached slowly, not wanting to frighten her. "Excuse me," he said gently, crouching down so he was closer to her eye level. "Are you all right? Are you waiting for someone?" The little girl looked at him with wide eyes, blue and frightened, and James could see she'd been crying. Her cheeks were red from the cold, and snowflakes had settled in her hair like tiny stars. "Sir," she said, her voice trembling, "my mom didn't come home last night." The words hit James like a physical blow. This child, this tiny girl standing in the snow, was telling a stranger that her mother was missing. His mind immediately went to all the terrible possibilities, but he kept his expression calm and reassuring. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked softly. "Lucy. Lucy Chen." "Hi, Lucy, I'm James. Can you tell me what happened?" "Where do you live?" Lucy's lower lip trembled. "We live on Maple Street, the apartment with the blue door. Mommy usually comes home from work by dinner time, but she didn't come home last night. Mrs. Peterson, our neighbor, she watched me and gave me breakfast. But she had to go to work today, so she told me to go to school. But I'm scared. What if something bad happened to Mommy?" James felt his chest tighten. This child had been alone, worried sick about her mother, and she'd still gone to school because that's what she'd been told to do. The trust and vulnerability in that simple act was heartbreaking. "Lucy, did Mrs. Peterson call the police? Or try to find out where your mom is?" "I don't know. She said Mommy probably just had to work late and forgot to call. But Mommy always calls. Always. Even when she has to work late. She always tells me." James pulled out his phone. "Lucy, I'm going to help you find your mom, okay? But first, we need to make sure you're safe and warm. It's very cold out here. Where were you planning to go right now?" "I was going to walk home, to see if Mommy was there. But I'm not sure I remember all the way. We just moved here 2 months ago." The thought of this little girl trying to navigate the city alone in a snowstorm, searching for her missing mother, was more than James could bear. He made a decision. "Lucy, I want to help you. Would it be okay if I came with you? We can go to your apartment together and see if your mom is there. And if she's not, we'll figure out where she is. Does that sound all right?" Lucy studied his face for a long moment, and James could see her weighing her options. Stranger danger versus the desperate need for help. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, but you seem nice. You have kind eyes. Mommy says you can tell if someone is kind by their eyes." "Your mommy sounds like a smart woman." "Come on, let's get you somewhere warm." James texted his driver to cancel, then gently took Lucy's hand. It was so small in his and so cold even through her mittens. He led her down the sidewalk, and she directed him toward Maple Street, which was about 8 blocks away. As they walked through the falling snow, James asked gentle questions, trying to piece together what had happened while also keeping Lucy's mind occupied. "Tell me about your mom, Lucy. What's her name?" "Grace. Grace Chen. She works at the hospital. She's a nurse. She helps people get better when they're sick or hurt. That's a very important job. She must be very caring." "She is. She's the best mommy in the whole world. She reads me stories every night, and she makes the best pancakes, and she always knows how to make me feel better when I'm sad." James felt a lump forming in his throat. "She sounds wonderful. And what about your dad? Is he at home?" Lucy shook her head. "Daddy died when I was a baby. I don't remember him. Mommy says he was very brave. He was a firefighter." Of course he was, James thought. This family had already endured so much, and now the mother was missing. Life could be unbearably cruel sometimes. They walked in silence for a moment, and James noticed how Lucy kept glancing at the people they passed, still searching every face for her mother. The hope and fear in her expression was almost too much to witness. "Lucy," James said gently, "when was the last time you saw your mom?" "Yesterday morning, before school. She kissed me goodbye and said she'd see me after work. She was working the day shift, so she was supposed to be home by dinner. But she never came. And Mrs. Peterson, the neighbor who watched you, she didn't seem worried. She said grown-ups sometimes have things come up. That mommy probably just got busy. But I know mommy wouldn't forget about me." "Something must be wrong." The conviction in Lucy's voice, the absolute certainty that her mother wouldn't abandon her, spoke to a bond that James found himself envying. His own childhood had been comfortable but cold. His parents more interested in building their business than building relationships with their only son. They turned onto Maple Street, a row of older apartment buildings with fire escapes climbing their facades. Lucy led him to a building halfway down the block, painted a faded yellow with a blue door at the entrance, just as she'd described. "This is it," Lucy said, her voice smaller now, as if she was afraid of what they might find. Or not find. James held the door as they climbed the stairs to the second floor. Lucy stopped at apartment 2B and reached into her backpack, pulling out a key on a string that she wore around her neck. "Mommy gave me this for emergencies," she explained. "She said I should never go into the apartment alone if she's not home. But this is an emergency, right?" "Yes, sweetheart. This is definitely an emergency." Lucy unlocked the door and they stepped inside. The apartment was small but tidy, with furniture that had clearly been chosen for function rather than style. But there were touches everywhere that spoke of love. Drawings taped to the refrigerator, a vase of fresh flowers on the kitchen table, photographs on every available surface showing a beautiful Asian woman with a bright smile holding a little girl at various ages. Grace Chen, James presumed. Lucy's mother. "Mommy?" Lucy called out, her voice echoing in the empty apartment. "Mommy, are you home?" Silence. The apartment had that particular stillness of a place where no one had been for hours. Lucy's face crumpled. "She's not here." "Where is she?" "Where's my mommy?" James knelt down and pulled the little girl into a gentle hug as she began to cry. "It's okay, Lucy. We're going to find her. I promise. But first, let me make some phone calls, all right?" He stood and pulled out his phone, first calling the local hospitals. He explained the situation, describing Grace Chen, a nurse who should have come home from work the previous evening. The first 2 hospitals had no record of her as a patient. The third hospital, City General, put him on hold for several minutes. Lucy sat on the couch, clutching a stuffed rabbit, watching James with frightened eyes. Finally, the hospital administrator came back on the line. "Mr. Crawford, I do have some information. Grace Chen is one of our nurses. She came in for her shift yesterday morning, but she collapsed during her lunch break. She'd been running a high fever and was severely dehydrated. She's been admitted as a patient. She's stable now, but she's been quite ill." Relief flooded through James. "Is she conscious?" "Can she have visitors?" "She is, though she's very weak. And yes, visitors are allowed. I should mention, she's been quite distressed. She keeps asking about her daughter, trying to get out of bed to go home. We've had to convince her multiple times that we've contacted her. Emergency contacts. Who are her emergency contacts? Let me see. A Mrs. Helen Peterson. We've left several messages but haven't heard back. Of course, Mrs. Peterson was at work. Lucy had said as much. Grace Chen had been lying in a hospital bed, sick and worried about her daughter. While that same daughter had spent a night with a neighbor and a day at school, terrified that something terrible had happened. I'm bringing her daughter to see her right now, James said. Thank you. He hung up and knelt back down in front of Lucy. Lucy, I found your mom. She's at the hospital where she works. She got sick yesterday, and she had to stay there so the doctors could help her feel better. But she's okay, and she's been very worried about you. Just like you've been worried about her. Lucy's face transformed. She's okay, really? Can we go see her? Absolutely. Right now. James called for a car service, and within 10 minutes, they were in the back of a warm sedan, driving through the snowy streets toward City General Hospital. Lucy sat pressed against the window, her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest, practically vibrating with anticipation. Is Mommy really okay? She asked for the third time. She really is. She's just been sick, so she'll probably look tired. But she's getting better. I should have known she was at the hospital. I should have thought of that. Lucy, you're 6 years old. You're not supposed to have to figure these things out on your own. That's what grown-ups are for. She looked at him seriously. Are you a good grown-up? The question, asked with such innocent directness, made James pause. Was he a good grown-up? He ran a successful company. He made a lot of money. He attended charity events and wrote checks to worthy causes. But when was the last time he'd actually stopped to help someone the way he was helping Lucy tonight? I'm trying to be, he said honestly. Lucy seemed satisfied with that answer. She reached over and took his hand. And James felt something crack open in his chest, some wall he'd built that he hadn't even known was there. They arrived at the hospital, and James led Lucy through the maze of corridors to the room number he'd been given. Grace Chen was in a semi-private room, though the other bed was empty. She lay against white pillows, her face pale and drawn, an IV in her arm. But when she saw Lucy in the doorway, her entire being seemed to light up from within. Lucy! Oh my God, Lucy! Mommy! Lucy ran to the bed and James had to help her climb up safely. Grace wrapped her arms around her daughter, tears streaming down her face, and Lucy was crying too. And James found himself having to look away because the rawness of their reunion was almost too intimate to witness. Baby, I'm so sorry, Grace was saying. I'm so sorry I couldn't call you. I tried, but I was so sick, and I passed out. And when I woke up, I was here, and they said they called Mrs. Peterson, but I didn't know if you knew where I was. It's okay, Mommy, I was scared, but Mr. James helped me. He found you. Grace looked up then, noticing James for the first time. Their eyes met, and James saw confusion, gratitude, and a mother's protective instinct all warring in her expression. Who are you? She asked, her arm tightening around Lucy. James stepped forward. James Crawford. I found Lucy outside my office building about an hour ago. She told me you hadn't come home, and I couldn't just leave her there. I hope that was the right thing to do. Grace's eyes filled with fresh tears. You helped her? You brought her here? Anyone would have done the same. No, Grace said firmly. They wouldn't have. Most people would have walked right past, or maybe called the police and kept moving. You stopped. You helped her. She pulled Lucy closer. Thank you. I don't know how to thank you enough. James shook his head. No thanks necessary. I'm just glad you're all right. Lucy was very worried about you. I was so worried about her. I kept trying to get up, to leave, to get home to her, but they wouldn't let me. They said I had pneumonia, that I needed antibiotics and rest. Grace looked down at her daughter. Mrs. Peterson was supposed to be watching you. She did watch me last night, Lucy explained. But she had to go to work today, so she told me to go to school. I went to school, but I was so scared, Mommy. So after school, I tried to walk home, but I got a little lost, and that's when Mr. James found me. Grace closed her eyes, and James could see her imagining all the terrible things that could have happened to her daughter wandering the city alone. When she opened her eyes again, she looked at James with an intensity that made him feel like she was seeing straight into his soul. You saved her, Grace said simply. You saved my daughter. I just did what anyone with a conscience would do. But most people don't have a conscience anymore. Not really. Not enough to stop, to get involved, to actually help. Grace's voice was getting stronger now, animated by emotion. Do you have children, Mr. Crawford? No, I don't. Then you can't fully understand what you did for me tonight. You can't know what it means to be lying here, helpless, terrified for your child, and then to have that child appear safe and sound. Because a stranger chose to be kind. She was crying again. Thank you. Thank you so much. James felt his own eyes burning. You're very welcome. A nurse appeared in the doorway then, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes. Mrs. Chen, I heard your daughter arrived. What wonderful news. She glanced at the monitors. But I'm afraid you need to rest now. Your blood pressure is rising and you need to stay calm. Can Lucy stay? Grace asked desperately. Please, just for tonight. I can't bear to be separated from her again. The nurse looked uncertain. Well, it's not exactly protocol. I'll arrange it, James heard himself say. Whatever it costs, whatever needs to happen. Lucy stays with her mother tonight. The nurse looked at him, clearly taking in his expensive clothes and the air of authority he carried. Are you family? He's the man who brought my daughter to me, Grace said firmly. That makes him family as far as I'm concerned. The nurse smiled. All right then. I'll see about getting a cot brought in. After she left, Grace looked at James again. You don't have to do that. Pay for things, I mean. You've already done so much. I want to. Let me help, please. Grace studied him for a long moment. Why? And please don't say it's what anyone would do, because we both know that's not true. Why are you really doing this? James thought about how to answer. He could give her something easy, something superficial. But looking at this woman and her daughter, this small family that had already weathered so much loss and hardship, he found himself wanting to be honest. Because I spent the last 15 years building a company and a career, and somewhere along the way I forgot to build a life. I forgot what actually matters. And then your daughter stood in the snow, outside my office, and told me her mother was missing, and I remembered. She reminded me that we're here to help each other. That success without compassion is just emptiness wearing an expensive suit. Grace's expression softened. That's a very honest answer. It's the truth. Lucy gave me a gift tonight even if she doesn't know it. She gave me a reason to remember why any of this matters. Lucy, who'd been listening quietly, looked up at James. You're a good grown-up, she said with certainty. I was right about your eyes. James had to laugh, even as he wiped at his own eyes. Thank you, Lucy. That means more than you know. He stayed for another hour, until Lucy had fallen asleep curled against her mother on the hospital bed, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. Grace dozed off too, one arm protectively around her daughter, both of them finally at peace. James spoke quietly with the nurse on duty, arranging for the cot and making sure Grace's medical bills were covered. He left his business card with instructions to call him, if Grace or Lucy needed anything at all. As he finally left the hospital and stepped out into the snowy night, James felt different somehow, lighter, more present. The city looked beautiful, transformed by the falling snow into something magical and new. He pulled out his phone and called his assistant, who answered on the second ring despite the late hour. Stephen, I need you to clear my schedule for tomorrow morning. I want to set up a meeting with our HR department. I want to create a program, something that helps single parents in crisis. Emergency child care, financial assistance, whatever they need. Sir, it's 9 o'clock at night. Are you all right? I'm better than I've been in years. I'll explain tomorrow. Just set it up. James hung up and started walking. Not ready to get in a car yet. Wanting to feel the snow on his face and the cold air in his lungs. He thought about Grace Chen, working herself sick while trying to raise a daughter alone. He thought about Lucy, so brave and trusting even in the face of fear. He thought about all the other Graces and Lucys out there, struggling quietly, hoping that someone would notice, that someone would care. And he thought about the man he'd been just a few hours ago, walking out of his office, building focused on quarterly reports and market projections, almost too busy to notice a little girl standing in the snow. That man felt like a stranger now. James pulled out his phone and looked at Grace's emergency contact information, which the hospital had provided. Tomorrow he'd call her, check on them both, see if there was anything else they needed. Maybe he'd stop by.